everyone! Amazingly today I have somewhat of a white pill in that an international institution is actually against cancel culture for once. And as you can probably tell by the title, for once Pope Francis has actually done something right. And since there's no point beating around the bush, let's get right into it. Cancel culture is rewriting the past, warns Pope Francis. It's good to finally hear the Pope say something and not cringe out of pure embarrassment of knowing that he is the leader of my church. The Pope has criticised cancel culture, claiming it suffocates freedom of expression, rewrites the past, and eliminates all sense of identity. Very base, Pope, please carry on. In a strongly worded speech yesterday to diplomats gathered at the Vatican, the Pope said, "A kind of one-trick thinking is taking shape, one constrained to deny history or worse yet, to rewrite it." And this is things I've been saying on this channel for some years now. It's good to see that the Pope is finally catching up and willing to say something about it. And to be fair to the Pope, this isn't the only thing he's come out against the grain of monist thinking about. He still opposes same-sex marriage, though I suppose these are the only two things making the headlines at the moment. The Pope said that the trend was influencing diplomacy, creating a mindset that rejects the natural foundations of humanity and the cultural roots that constitute the identity of many peoples. The result, he said, was a form of ideological colonisation, one that leaves no room for freedom of expression, and is now taking the form of the cancel culture, invading many circles and public institutions. And I think there's good reason that Pope Francis, out of every other Christian institution in the world, is the one mainly pushing back on this. Because Pope Francis must have realised that cancel culture is predominantly affecting Christian nations and Christian identities. And the article does go into it a bit later. But when we're seeing, say, statues torn down, or people losing their jobs or losing their livelihoods or whatever due to cancel culture, it is usually in the defence of a traditionally Christian nation or Christian person, i.e. anyone in the West, or anyone who defends American, English, and I'm sure any other type of European culture, especially if they used to have an empire. And obviously a lot of these countries have Catholic roots at the very least, if not Catholic, Christian. And it's obviously in Pope Francis's interest to defend this. The article carries on. Although he delivered his speech in Italian, Pope used the English phrase cancel culture. He added, under the guise of defending diversity, it ends up cancelling all sense of identity, with the risk of silencing positions that defend a respectful and balanced understanding of various sensibilities. The Pope was giving an annual address to ambassadors accredited to the Vatican, an event that he uses to outline the papacy's foreign policy goals, and apparently one of these goals now is to stop cancel culture. Diplomacy, he said, must be truly inclusive, not cancelling but cherishing the differences that have historically marked various peoples. In 2020, US bishops protested when a crowd in Sacramento, California, pulled down a statue of the 18th century priest Junipero Serra, who founded missions in California and converted Native Americans to Christianity. So there you go, perfect example of what I said before. The Pope is on, let's say, our side of cancel culture because it's in his interest. If he wasn't on our side, he'd be for the taking down of people who are venerated for doing good missionary work for the Catholic Church. It's not in his interest to be on the side that tears down any statue that is now seen as going against the current woke zeitgeist. The Catholic Church would be absolutely ruined, especially with their history. And the next line in the article perfectly makes this point. Despite being canonised in 2015, Serra was condemned by critics as a symbol of colonialism and the exploitation of indigenous people. I don't know how true that is. I don't really care. Statues are not put up for the bad things people do. Statues are put up for the good things people do. The statue was not put up for whatever wrongdoing he may have done, if any, whatever he's accused of. The statue was put up for the good work he did for the Catholic Church, in converting people to Catholicism. Last month, the Pope rebuked the European Union after it advised member states in a document to stop using the phrase Happy Christmas, and instead to say Happy Holidays to avoid offending non-Christians. The attempt to eliminate references to Christmas recalled the Nazis and communist regimes, he claimed. The European Union must respect each country as it is structured and not want them to make it uniform, he said. He was supported by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, who attacked the cancellation of our roots, the Christian dimension of our Europe. The EU booklet claimed it was a mistake to assume that everyone is Christian, adding not everyone celebrates the Christian holidays and not all Christians celebrate them on the same dates. The booklet also gave advice on gender-neutral language, asking officials to never address an audience as ladies and gentlemen, but to use expressions such as dear colleagues. The EU withdrew the guidelines after protest. Well, thank God for that. And just to be clear, after this article, I'm obviously not going to be saying Pope based or anything like that. He still seems to be, for lack of a better word, posed, especially on the climate debate. However, it will be interesting to see how your average Catholic at church will take this, because honestly, quite a lot of them just turn out to be Labour voters, relatively left-wing, and a lot of them do still think Jesus is a socialist for whatever reason. Hopefully it'll be getting them thinking on this issue and they won't be fully supporting Colston's statue coming down, but there we go. And cancel culture just seems to get more and more ridiculous by the day. In fact, it seems to get less and less ideological and more petty. So we're moving from links to the slave trade to these stories from America, and one of them's 6 months old, but I never got round to actually making a video on it. So here's my excuse to. There was a rock at University of Wisconsin-Madison called Chamberlain Rock. According to the university's own newspaper, the rock had sat on the crest of Observatory Hill since 1925. The same year it was referred to in a newspaper headline by a deeply offensive nickname that included a racial slur. The derogatory nickname was commonly used at the time to refer to any large, dark rock. That word being a particular N-word I think you all know. So obviously, because it was current year -1, the university had to get rid of it. And I think what I love most about this story is that nothing that the guy, Chamberlain, did, who was an American geologist, was actually racist. They didn't bring anything up about Chamberlain to be racist. The only thing they could find was a newspaper from 1925 or whatever that described it as people commonly describe black rocks in America for whatever reason as N-word brown. And, well, for whatever reason, it was common in the US to call rocks that weren't brown N-word brown. It was a common phrase around the Anglosphere, because I know a 1920s stage show written about the Pals Brigades in World War I called Accrington Pals has a line in it describing a bag coloured N-word brown. We did the play at school, and one of the students had to say that line. Did the black actors care? No, they did not. Why can't these people not care? So, in short, this is obviously the most ridiculous example of cancel culture I've ever seen, but the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Madison had to write a letter to explain his actions. Obviously, we're going to go through it. What a rock has to do with racism. Strong start already. On August 6, the University of Wisconsin-Madison removed a 42-ton boulder formerly known as Chamberlain Rock from our main campus. This was not, as some have assumed, a knee-jerk decision. Rather, it came after more than a year of in-depth conversation with stakeholders from across the spectrum, engaging in the process of shared governance. Well, that's even more embarrassing. Members of the Wisconsin Black Student Union and WUNC-SHEIK, a Native American student organisation, met with the campus planning committee to present their point of view and the harm they describe. The committee also heard from members of the geology department, researchers, historians, campus leadership, the Ho-Chunk tribe and others. The campus planning committee, after thoughtful deliberation, recommended moving the rock, and I endorse this action. Well, you're an idiot. One newspaper from 1925, apparently that affects this massive decision over a rock put there because they wanted to celebrate a geologist. And the geologist didn't even do anything wrong. The only thing wrong with this rock is how someone somewhere described it at some point in the past. The process began in the summer of 2020. I listened as the WBSU and WUNC-SHEIK members explained why they saw the rock as a symbol of anti-blackness. I'm sure... Please tell me what they actually said. You're just saying they made an argument. That argument could have been wank. I'm sure you remembered that time. It was the first summer of COVID-19 and our campus community was bewildered, overwhelmed and in pain. On May 25, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, sparking a protest movement around the world. Oh my god, I'm sure George Floyd is looking from whatever afterlife he's in and saying, I'm glad they removed that rock. As Chancellor, one of my responsibilities is to build a community that supports each student who studies here. We want to hear about students' lived experiences in the campus community. The students who came to me to ask for the removal of Chamberlain Rock were not performing. They were thoughtful, they were seeking change and interrogating the past and its impacts on the present in their own daily lives. And they were brave. The process was reasoned and a deliberative one. Viewing the question of the rock through different perspectives, experiences and practicalities, this is ridiculous. I mean, from the sounds of this alone, everyone was on their side. They came to no pushback here. There is nothing brave about pushing on an open door, which is exactly what these students did, and the same with the Colston Four. Literally, you can come forward and say absolutely anything is racist, and everyone in the establishment will be on your side to get rid of whatever it is you're saying is racist. Hence the Colston Four got off, hence these people managed to get a rock removed. That didn't even represent anything racist, it was just some newspaper from 1925 that used a bad word. That's it. To assume that they were doing this for other motives, as some have done, is to be something worse than cynical. It is to be uncurious. God. The rock, they said, had a negative impact on campus climate as African American students on their own lives, and they asked us to remove it. Students knew of the rock's association with a vile racial slur in the 1920s because the rock is part of the campus cultural landscape tour, in which, as an effort to own and learn from the mistakes of the past, we acknowledge that history. This doesn't even have anything to do with the university. It was associated with a vile racial slur of the 20s, used by one newspaper. The slur's direct, documented association with the rock provided a compelling foundation for the proposed change. Are you one short of a marble, Chancellor? Imagine actually having a collective of people get together, go up to the Chancellor and say, "Hi, this rock, it was referred to by a racial slur in the 1920s, can you please remove it?" And the Chancellor unironically says yes. How does a rock that is described as an offensive word in the 1920s affect you in any way? The rock isn't there because of the way it was described. The rock is there to celebrate the work that a geologist did at the University of Wisconsin. Should women no longer have brown bags because at one point they were described as N-word brown? I didn't think so. Some will tell you that a rock is just a rock, that to fear harm from an inanimate object is pre-scientific or irrational. Yes, but to be human is to imbue objects with meaning. True. It's why we offer flowers when we mourn or love, why we have keepsakes stowed away in our drawers and closets, and why people unknowingly begin to whisper when they approach the US Constitution in the National Archives. To be sure, the rock is an innocent object, in which we invest meaning. Jesus. This is a conversation about its symbolic associations, which have intense meaning to some and no meaning to others. When we made the decision to move the rock, we listened to those who saw a legacy of racism and present-day pain when others saw a mere rock. Now, wow, that is... wow. Wow! According to that paragraph, there are only two ways to see the rock. One is it as just an inanimate object that means nothing, and another is an inanimate object that is racist. No, there's a third way to look at it. You look at it as a monument to a man who did good work, and as far as I can tell, didn't even do anything racist, though I'm sure he was, because he was in 19th century America. But that's not been brought up. All that's been brought up is that this newspaper called it the N-word. That's it. That is insane. Imagine putting all the meaning of this rock that has nothing to do with this newspaper, and doesn't even... No one who put that rock up cared about this newspaper, but imagine putting all the meaning into this rock from that. That is just ridiculous. I love this story, I really do. Our geologists wanted to preserve the rock. They saw a unique Precambrian glacial erratic. A rock carried hundreds or thousands of miles in glaciers until it was left behind when the glacier melted, or from an iceberg, which they sent their students to study. As a result, we chose to relocate the boulder to university-owned lands southeast of Madison, where it remains accessible for teaching purposes. By some estimates, the rock travelled to Wisconsin from Canada some 2 billion years ago. The forces that smoothed its edges, the landscape it travelled, are hard to know, but curiosity drives us to find out more and to understand its history and its intersection with our own. Oh my god. They couldn't even get the geology right. The thing with erratics is that they tend to be angular, and the reason is because they don't have water flowing over it, but they're just dropped by ice, as he says. So forces that bang rocks into each other, or bang smaller rocks onto bigger rocks that smooth them out, aren't in effect as much on erratic, so I don't know why you just randomly got the geology wrong. But what's annoying me more than that is that the geology department didn't want to keep a memorial to one of their greatest associates that died 100 and something years ago. They can't even defend a monument to him, because that's how much power these people have. I mean, there might have been pushback from the department, I don't know, but Honestly, I think there was, and I think the Chancellor is just trying to say that, oh, no one was actually trying to defend it, though. Or just not mention if there was any defence at all, because there's probably so much threat from this collective. I mean, you've got Native American and black student unions, and essentially they do have a lot of power. They have a lot of intersectional power behind them, which appears to be one of the primary roots of power these days, just happen to be born right. And somehow this only gets worse. At University of Wisconsin-Madison, and like many institutions, we are working to acknowledge the often painful history of racism and other forms of exclusion on campus. 3 years ago, I commissioned a study of the history of groups associated with the Ku Klux Klan on campus. Based on that study's recommendations, I funded a public history project to investigate and uncover the historical experiences of marginalised groups on campus, whose story is often not part of our traditional campus histories. I strongly believe that if we do not acknowledge both the good and the bad parts of our history, we cannot construct a better future. That's why I took seriously the symbolic concerns associated with Chamberlain Rock. So this was knee-jerk. This was, oh, I'm looking into racism and some people are saying this rock's racist. Well, I have to get rid of that then. You're virtue signalling. That's basically all you've admitted there. It's also important to note that the rock is not a well-known campus monument. If I had to guess, I would estimate that many of our students and alumni did not know there was something called Chamberlain Rock on campus prior to recent publicity, and if asked, few could have told you where it was located. I love this argument as well. Oh, it didn't really mean that much to people anyway. Okay, so why does it mean so much that it needs to be removed then? How can it mean that much if no one even knows about it? They always bring that argument up, and it's one that's on really rickety ground. If one is going to move a campus object, you have to ask to whom it has meaning. While the rock has clear symbolic meaning for those students asking for its removal, for many other students the rock has a limited meaning. Oh my days. I can't get over this story. He's admitted in this entire writing that he only really listened to the people complaining about it. He didn't. All he heard from the geology department was, oh, we kind of need it to still study. But then it just feels like he's trying to cover up the fact that people do actually know it and do actually like the fact that it's a monument to a great scientist for the university. But he's just covering that up by saying, oh, well, no one really knows about it. If no one really knows about it, how can it possibly offend people because it was called the N-word 100 years ago? You can't be having these clear contradictions in your own writing. It makes you sound like an idiot. Literally, this whole essay has been an excuse to say, oh, clearly there's meaning in anonymous objects, which obviously everyone agrees with. But then he has to turn around and say, oh, well, it's only the people that see it as racist that matter. Those that actually want to keep the rock for its historical and monumental purposes. Oh, no, we can just ignore them, because no one really knows what the rock is anyway. Ridiculous. I was just going to leave the article there, but honestly, the last 3 paragraphs are just too funny to miss out on. So, in the midst of all this, few people have said anything about President Chamberlain, to whom the rock was dedicated. He is clearly unimplicated in any non-symbolic meaning placed on this rock. Honestly, I would doubt that they had a big student-wide discussion about this, explaining who the guy was and why the rock's being moved. I reckon they just heard the one side and went, oh, well, no one said anything about it, because that's the easiest way out of this. But President Chamberlain's memory was important enough that people in the past created something by which to honour him, and that decision should be respected. Did you hear that, Colston 4? Colleagues on campus have prepared a new plaque honouring President Chamberlain, which will be placed in Weeks Hall, which houses the Geosciences Department, which was President Chamberlain's home department. At least they're doing that, I guess. I just can't imagine saying this rock's racist, and then other people are saying, well, President Chamberlain was pretty important, this is a monument to him. And then they'd say, oh, you know what, take the rock, it doesn't really matter, we'll just put a new plaque up. I can't imagine that happened. It seems too ridiculous, but this is an American college, university. Creating a more inclusive environment in our universities and our society is a difficult task, but it includes removing rocks. But a critical one in our contentious, polarised times. Do you think maybe removing rocks for absolutely no good reason might play into this polarisation? I'm sorry, removing rocks? Removing monuments to great people of the past. Progress is made incrementally, with real, not performative change. Higher education is deeply invested in this process, and University of Wisconsin-Madison is no exception. That's why at the same time we are discussing this symbol with students. We were also expanding a fundraising campaign to recruit and retain more diverse students and faculty. It's named for Mabel Watson Ramey and William Smith Noland, the first black woman and man to graduate from the university. We've already raised nearly $50 million. That's just one example of the tangible actions we are taking. Again, this is just screaming to me that some people called something racist and you knee-jerked. Like, don't mention this and I won't say it. But it's like they're putting out penances for their racist past. It's like, oh no, I'm sorry I sinned in the past. Look, $50 million for diversity. Woo! Just, stop, it's cringe. Outsiders, such as those in national media and international media, don't know our story and our history. They may not read deeply enough into our decisions on this rock in the context of scores of other actions undertaken last summer. They may only think of a world-class research university where vitamin D enrichment was invented, the first embryonic stem cell line was developed. But we know that a committed campus community learns and grows together. We continue to be curious about our past and how it has shaped who we are today. Chamberlain Rock is part of that history. Well, not anymore! I bloody love it. No, removing the rock removes that line of history. What was once a monument and something to celebrate the history of your own university had to be removed because of something that wasn't even related to the university or the man who the monument was dedicated to in question. So give me the stuff about you're curious of history and how it affects you today. You don't care about any of that. You're just trying to appease people today who are whinging about removing rocks. And I really wish this was the last story I had to take from America about naming convention. But it's not. Here's another article. Cancel culture reaches a peak with war on racist mountains. We've gone from racist rocks to racist mountains. Please stop cancelling my subject of speciality. More than 1,000 places and monuments could be renamed as America tries to wipe out offensive place names. Places with racist and sexist names are sprinkled throughout the US after white settlers took over the land that had been occupied by indigenous peoples. In Colorado, for example, a state board is considering proposals to rename more than 20 natural features, including Redskin Mountain and Negro Mesa. The state's Geographical Naming Advisory Board has ruled that Chinaman Gulch should be Yansing Gulch, from the Cantonese word meaning resilience. The state has changed Squaw Mountain, a pejorative term for a Native American woman, to Metasahihi Mountain in honour of the 19th century Chilean translator. Words mean ideas, Randa Wheelock, a member of the Colorado County Commissioners Board, told the Washington Post. These new words that we learn will connect us to the real history. And again, they're trying to put it in terms of, oh, we're looking at the real history. We're curious about history, which is why we have to completely rename everything. No, as Pope Francis said, you are just completely rewriting it. That's all you're doing here? How many Native Americans do you actually think care that there's a mountain called Redskin Mountain? How many Chinese people do you think actually care there's a place called Chinaman's Gulch? Again, this is a minority opinion that all these things have to be changed, all these rocks have to be moved. And it was definitely a minority opinion in Bristol that Edward Colston statue should have been torn down. If a community genuinely wants something renamed, or if a community genuinely wants a monument taken down, it's fine to take them down by democratic means. That is fine. And this is my biggest issue with it. This is some nameless board that's probably to some extent unaccountable by democratic means, that has come out with a decision to rename a lot of places in Colorado, and nationwide it's over 1,000 places. It's the same with the rock. It wasn't put out to the vote to the students or anything like that. I don't even think many people knew it was being moved. But no, 2 student organisations in Wisconsin say, we find this rock offensive because of some 1920s newspaper. Boom, move straight away. This naming board says, oh, you know, Redskin Mountain could be offensive. Yeah, we'll change the name. No idea if Native Americans actually care about that. No idea. In California, an initiative has been announced to redress discriminatory names for state parks. In June, 16 places in Texas will rename to remove the word Negro. I'm sorry, that's the Spanish word for black, and it was probably named by Spaniards. Similar changes are planned in Nevada and Utah. Deb Haaland, Interior Secretary and first Native American to serve in the US Cabinet, said last month that the word squaw was derogatory and ordered that it be removed from more than 650 names of federal sites. Racist terms have no place in our vernacular or our federal lands, she said. Changing place names can take years, especially in the face of opposition or when there is a debate over the new name. Haaland hopes to accelerate the federal process, but final approval rests with the US Board on Geographic Names, which was formed in 1890 to standardize maps across America. Jennifer Runyon, a researcher at the board, said that it had received 430 proposals in the years to October to change offensive names including Mulatto Run in Virginia, Sambo Creek in Pennsylvania, and Dead Indian Mountain in Oregon. What was it, in 1984? Every street name had been rewritten. Everything gets memory hold, everything gets rewritten. He who controls the past controls the present. But I'm sure you've all read that book. A lot of the names did override a name given by a tribal group, she said. They had names for those places. Do you know what they are? There are rules that have come into force over the years. The N-word is banned. Is it banned? Is it banned? I'm pretty sure you can still say the N-word in America, as a pejorative references to Japanese people. Is that true? Americans, please tell me if either of those things are true. Squaw is the latest term added to the banned list. What banned list? What list are you talking about? Some critics see the ban as an example of cancel culture similar to the removal of Confederate statues. Last year, a referendum was held in Mississippi on the design of the state flag, replacing one that included the Confederate battle flag. Almost 3/4 of voters approved the new design, so things like that, that's perfectly acceptable to me. They want a redesign, they vote on it, majority of people say yes, this flag represents me better. That's totally fine with me. But what seems to be going on here is some sort of centralised government force telling us what we can and can't call things, and that to me is bad. I mean, really, if you rename Dead Indian Mountain or Dead Indian Creek, whatever it was, do you really think people are going to stop referring to it as Dead Indian Creek? Do you really think that's going to... Do you think the locals are going to care what some federal government says? No, they're going to continue calling it what they've always called it, because they don't want the change. And I do just want to be clear, because I think people in the comments will misunderstand me. I'm not saying democracy good here. I'm saying I can't think of a better way to decide how to take down a statue, replace a statue, replace a state flag, whatever. I can't think of a better way to decide that than an actual referendum of the people that it's supposed to represent. For small-scale communities, deciding what and what doesn't represent them, I think democracy can work. That is all I am saying here. On a national government level, I think you need better answers. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.